So yes, that's a lot of theoretical talk, but we'd like to hear from the people who actually work with patients. I think, Marc, you just introduced yourself and described in what kind of context you work with psychedelics, but I'd like to hear the same from the others as well. Felix, since you have a microphone, maybe you can tell us what you do and in what kind of context and framework you do it, briefly.
So I'm a psychiatrist, and I work at Brugmann Hospital in addiction medicine, and I also work in a study where we use psilocybin to treat alcohol use disorder. That study started in April, so I work in that study as a psychiatrist and therapist.
Hi, I'm Nina Callens. I'm a clinical psychologist, and my work in academia on the one side and work in clinical practice as well really focuses on the intersections of or between relational and sexual well-being and trauma. And at a certain point, we were confronted with a challenging truth, the fact that psychotherapy, with or without medication, didn't provide the significant relief that some clients of mine were looking for. So we co-founded, me and my partner, we co-founded Eremia, and we organize immersive retreats with psilocybin in the Netherlands in a legal and safe environment under medical supervision.
Do you have a website by any chance? And Marc from Steenkiste?
If you say the name, maybe I will remember. Okay, I'm a psychiatrist, as I told this morning. I've been through several trainings in the course of my career, and one of the challenges I've always appreciated is, what does this model not solve? What's the limit of the model? And that makes you always move the frontier. I do mostly longer therapies with traumatized patients, and every now and then somebody has seen your website, and which is a problem because the legal frame in Belgium makes it impossible to give it as an advice. So,
yes. The first question I'd like to ask to you all, but I'll start with you, Marc, is what can psychedelic-assisted therapy offer that other types of therapy cannot? Why do you resort to psychedelic therapy? What is lacking in conventional therapy?
I moved from I didn't move from psychoanalysis to, for instance, mindfulness and compassion training. Yes, because I bumped into the limits of the talking. It was as if talking didn't really touch some layers deep down. It's hard to explain what psychedelics, in my opinion, do. I must say I have several people who, rationally speaking, they know what should happen or what's wrong or in which direction they should go, but there is a kind of feeling stuck inside. And I think a psychedelic, I'm rather in favor of psilocybin. It can unlock something. You call your retreats unlock, and I think that's a very beautiful word. It unlocks something, okay, and then you can continue a process. There is one guy in my group now that I have with Tanya, and he came to me and he said, I was completely stuck in my life, in my inner world. I took one session of psilocybin, and now I can start my therapy. So something has been, but what this exactly is.
Nina, since you also work with patients you bring there, I'd like to ask you the same question and also ask you what the profile would be of a patient to who you would advise psychedelic-assisted therapy.
Maybe the question is more what is the profile of people coming to Eremia? We have a couple of groups. The first group is definitely people who have tried more alternative treatments, psychotherapy, medication, and it didn't work somehow. So they see it a bit like a last resort type of thing. I'm going to try this and maybe continue with therapy afterwards. Another group is people who don't really fall into the category, I say, of psychopathology, but people who are very interested in sort of knowing who who they are, their relationships with others. They're really motivated by self-work, you could say. They are very willing to engage with difficult emotions, with difficult insights. These people have a stable health. All people are, by the way, screened for neurological and cardiovascular type of conditions. Then we have a third group who are healthcare providers, actually, wanting to know what it is, if they could refer people doing this, clients doing this. So the curious group, which is a good thing, I hear. And then the last group are people who are confronted with a terminal illness, people who are dealing with the anxiety around dying, with the existential distress, and the sort of they're looking for a way to accept it more. I think those are the categories of people that, I mean, many people could benefit from it, but I think that's the biggest.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you think you could try to pinpoint what exactly it is that psychedelic therapy offers that's conventional therapy does not?
It just blows your mind, I think. It's very intangible, exactly, and I think that's what there is a bit mystery around it. Yeah, I have to agree with Marc. Like, it's very difficult to put into words.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Since this is the part about sorry.
At the same time, the strange thing is it's such an unknown thing that opens up, and at the same time, it's like you have always known that. There is a very strange contradiction there. It's as if you touch something that is very essential for existence, and at the same time, it's mind-blowingly new.
Yeah. So hard to put into words.
These are the words I can give to it.
Thank you. Felix?
Yeah. So I don't want to destroy the mystery or anything, but as a doctor, I kind of feel compelled to speak about that. So I think, there is some magic here happening, but maybe this magic also comes from the community, the love that people feel. That's also something that you get from other sources than psychedelics. So what I would say, what sets psychedelic therapy apart from other kinds of therapies? On one hand, nothing, because it's kind of like faster therapy maybe. But on the other hand, everything, because if you think about other psychotherapies, you don't give a potent hallucinogen that induces potentially neuroplasticity in the brain. So let's not forget that we give an actual substance that acts on the brain.
Maybe you already hinted at it, but since this is about the basics of PAT, I'd like to hear you on what exactly is set and setting. There's a lot of talk about set and setting. It seems to be very important, but can you just elaborate a bit?
Yes, thank you, Olivier, for the boring question. But fortunately, it hasn't been spoken about yet. So if you want to take psychedelics, and of course, I do not recommend you take illegal drugs, but if you do want to do that, then the set would be like, who are you as a person? Do you have any medical or psychiatric problems? What happened recently in your life? What do you want from this experience? The setting would be the environment. So where would you take a substance? With who would be there to sit you? Or maybe there wouldn't be anyone. Which music you want to listen to, and so on. So of course that's hugely important. And I started thinking about this more as, again, a medical doctor. So just saying, for me, the set is like the indication. Are we giving this treatment to the right person at the right time for the right condition? And the setting is like, who is giving the treatment? I mean, is your operating room clean, or do you do the surgery in the forest? And so on,
Okay, thank you. Maybe someone else about,
There's a friend of mine, Ido Hartogson. He's an Israeli researcher that he wrote a book on set and setting. And he speaks about one thing that blew my mind is that set and setting is also our cultural landscape of our time. Yeah? So the setting that we live in is like we're fishes swimming in the water, but we don't see the water that much. So it's not the same times now that in the 60s. Therefore, that also influences the kind of experiences that we're having. If you think about the hippies, they had a tendency towards more spiritual experiences. No, it was like, this is for peace and love and liberation. You think about the music that was created back then inspired by psychedelics. Okay, that's one kind of zeitgeist. No? Now we're in a different sort of culture. It's much more of a medicalized, trauma-based, psychologized approach to psychedelics, and a lot of people report their experiences from this perspective as well. Yeah, I go into the psychedelic state to learn more about my personality, my traumas, my biography, and to work psychologically with that. Yeah, so our cultural setting and set also has an impact on the experiences that we're having. Good thing is that we collectively create that, so what you do somehow affects that cultural set and setting.
Keep the mic, because since you're holding it, another very important aspect of psychedelic-assisted therapy is integration. We touched upon it before, but could you detail what kind of aftercare or ongoing support is typically necessary after a patient has undergone this kind of therapy?
Most of the times, if things have gone well, people don't need a lot of support. Yeah, most of the times in clinical trials, people just continue their old therapies. They can go back to the therapies that they had. And with a couple or 3 integration sessions to make sure that they are safe, that they are stable, that they have a somehow good understanding or grasping of the experience, that is all that they feel that they need. They don't need specific support of, I need to do something with this experience. They usually find their own ways to integrate the experience, be it with self-integration practices. That's my daughter, by the way. Self-integration practices like journaling, painting, and all that, so people find ways to continue integrating. But sometimes when people have had challenging experiences, they do ask for a more specific type of support. Like, I have the need for somebody to help me with this difficulty that I've had. This is a minority of people, but given the numbers of people taking psychedelics nowadays, it's a considerable number, yeah? Most of the times what this has to do is with becoming more unstable after the experience and having emotions or thoughts that you cannot really control. So there's an increased anxiety, there can be flashbacks from the psychedelic experience itself. So the psychedelic experience could become a traumatic event from in itself, yeah? And in these cases, a more specific integration approach is what's usually needed that will somehow restore the sense of balance that they had before the experience. And that's mostly what I've been focusing in the last decade. I've been working in this kind of situation. But good news is that most of the times people will find their own ways to continue integrating, and their regular therapy will be enough, or their self-integration practices will be enough.
Yes, Nina, please.
Thank you. I think I would like to add that sometimes what we hear from people is that it's very difficult to talk about with people who haven't done it. And especially when they get home and they try to explain what has happened in some way. So what we do, for instance, is we organize holding circles, basically, reconnect days, where people who've had these type of experiences can share a little bit about their story, make sense of it to some capacity, but really just talk about it when they want. Another aspect, and I think you mentioned it before, maybe it was Marc, is really engaging the body also, because there are some truths hold in that body, and so to engage more with holotropic breath work or other ways that really have that integrated as well, I would say.
Thank you. Felix, I'm curious how integration works within a scientific study, a clinical study. How do you guys do it in the framework of your study at Brugmann?
So yeah, I had actually a whole response prepared for that, but what Marc said before, that really was interesting, that 1 hour of preparation is equal to 10 hours of integration. So what I wanted to say initially is that, yeah, we have 2 times 2 hours of integration, which for some people seems to be enough, more or less, but for many other patients it's not enough. And for some participants it has felt like some kind of abandonment to be in this study and to be taken care of that much, to be like a special patient. And then when the study is over, I mean, there's like nothing. It's like a gaping nothingness, and they feel all alone. And that has been a problem. But yeah, maybe it would be interesting to look at also from the other side and think about prepare them better for that, because although it's not the best thing, it's kind of inevitable also in a scientific study. There's always a limited follow-up.
Marc?
Yes, I want to add something there. Of course, I only can talk about patients that I have in longer running therapies, but for some cases, I was thinking about one woman I have seen, I'm still seeing her, who was abused by her father, and it was a very, very violent man, and then after a certain event had happened, he threatened to kill the pet, and he really did it, and she saw him going to the pet, and he really crushed the little dog. And in between the two moments, she said, I was in space. I was in space, and there was nothing. There was only me, and I tried to yell, but I could only hear my own voice. It didn't. And this is an experience that was, when she told it, it was very touching in a very harrowing way. And this situation has been going on now, I'm still seeing her, for months. There is a great suffering there. I think in the long run it will be okay, but okay, you can never know that. But an experience like this, I think you cannot manage it in 2 sessions, in 2 talks of so you're on your own afterwards. I don't know, I think you should, you cannot know it in advance, but I think you should take into account that things like that might happen. And I think if that woman would be on her own, with that experience, I don't know, I wouldn't sleep well.
Yes, that's probably one of the limits of scientific research, but we'll talk about that later on. Since you're all working with real people, and people love to hear stories of, because it's also personalizes something that might seem quite theoretical. I'll ask the question to all of you. Do you have a patient that stood out for some reason and that illustrates the potential of psychedelic therapy in a positive or maybe in a negative way? Is there a story that you remember and that you would like to share with us? Either, any one of you.
I can respond, but I can't share details. But what I can say is that there has been at least one case where the patient had like a very intense experience that seemed very insightful, and where we as therapists thought, wow, this will change something, and something significant happened here. And then afterwards, the patient, when we saw them in integration, was like, well, that was great, thank you. And then nothing. Like, okay, well, that's a pity, because we had so much hope there. But on the other hand, other patients that seem to have, I mean, that's my own judgment coming in, like superficial experiences, and they everything went well, everything was great for them. So yeah, I think I have also to keep back my own judgment about experience.
So I can share 2 kind of different experiences. One is from a patient that found a website, as you guys say here in Belgium, and and he did a run of experiences with MDMA to deal with sexual abuse that he had experienced in a boarding school when he was a kid. Yeah. So the treatment, he went to this website several times, and eventually, at some point, he said, "Now I think that I would like to take MDMA on my own. I feel ready for that. I think I can have an experience by myself." And that was like a turning point. No, this guy had had 30 years of therapy non-stop, and at some point he felt like, you know what? Now I can do it on my own. That for me was an outstanding moment. No? And the other cases in a clinical trial, I was called to be part of the therapist team in a pilot study with very high doses of psilocybin, 50 milligrams, which is a lot. Normally the high dose in a clinical trial is 25. So 50 is double the high dose, yeah? And everybody was very scared. It was the first participant. The previous one had received placebo, and they decided that, okay, this time it's not going to be placebo, so it's a pilot study, we're going to give 50 milligrams. But he didn't know, the participant, yeah? And then there was this turmoil in the medical team. This is a high dose. It's the first time we're doing this. This is a very young guy, never had experience with psychedelics. It was a healthy volunteer, yeah? but he didn't know what was in for. And the team was like, he's not ready for this experience. Like, he doesn't know what's coming, and there is gonna be, so we were about to cancel the session. Yeah, but in the end, having a conversation with my co-therapist was like, he came here, he seems to be okay with this. We've done all the screening, everything is as good as it can be, you know? So it's maybe more our fear than, so we went for it, and we had to check the intensity of the experience every half an hour, something like that. Like, how intense is it now? Like 0. Now, 1. And now 3. Now 5. And now 10. And now 10. And now 10. And then he was a lot of hours in 10. Later, he told us that the first 10 was nothing compared to the other 10s. No? So, well, we were waiting for the guy to finish, and then he finished. We checked with him. He seemed to be okay. This was like one preparation session, and integration was just after the experience. So really pilot basic study. So we were talking with this guy, and he says, no, I think I'm fine. I'm going to go check on my uni assignments. So after a 50 milligram experience, he went then. He started checking his email, reading the news, checking the sports bet that he had done for his football team or whatever, you know. Yeah, you know, so nothing really had happened for this guy after a 50 milligram experience. Yeah, he was okay, and we were the ones that were worried. So sometimes you don't know what can happen, no? And other times can be the other way around. You give a very small dose, and things go really unexpected, no? So, yeah.
Did it remain like that in the longer run? I mean, that it didn't really seem to get anything from it?
Well, he was a healthy volunteer. He was in for, so they were paid in this study, yeah? He was a university student. He just needed some extra money, was interested in trying psychedelics in a controlled setting. He wasn't expecting anything really, and that was okay, you know? We saw him the next day, all good. It's like, what else, man? No, man, lots of visions and stuff. It was kind of crazy. I cried for a moment, it was emotional. But, you know, it didn't seem like an eventful experience from a therapeutic point of view. So.
Okay. Nina, have you seen this, or maybe you have a story to share first?
Yeah, so I'm also a couples therapist, and sometimes it's very interesting to see what the partner has to say about the other one taking psychedelics. Now, I have to be, psychedelics is not a magical bullet. Like, it doesn't always changes everything. So wanting to keep things realistic. But when you get sometimes messages from the partner saying like, wow, I have a different partner here, I have a different person, that's it still gives me goosebumps. And we had messages before of people thinking about 2 guys now who wanted to end their life, really. We're kind of in this last phase of it's over for me, and I'm going to try this and give it one more shot. And 2 of the people I'm thinking about right now, and this is not with everyone, but the 2 people, they're still alive, and they're still thriving in a way, and happy, and surrounded by their family, and that's also why we're doing it in a way. So yeah.
Yeah, well, makes quite a change in those cases between life and death.
Yeah.
Have you seen the same things as Felix talked about, like people who seem to have a very intense experience and nothing much seems to come of it, or the opposite, like a bland experience but major changes?
Yeah, so sometimes we get people who say like, I don't feel anything, and you see complete changes in their behavior, and they're just not open to it. Maybe that's the wrong phrasing, but yeah, it doesn't get to them, or only months after. And that's the interesting group, and that's why I think follow-up is sometimes necessary, because sometimes it's not in a moment itself or slowly thereafter, but at a later point that there is significant change. But yeah, I can follow him. Yeah.
Okay. Well, you just said it. Psychedelics are not a magic bullet. There are even some risks associated with psychedelics and even psychedelic-assisted therapy. So it wouldn't be fair to not talk about the risks. I think it's very important. And one of the popular or well-known risks is the bad trip that many people seem to fear and talk about. Like, am I going to go crazy? Will I be tripping permanently? Will I die? Or what anything else? So with patients, so first of all, I'd like to know, is this a real danger? And also with patients, how do you deal with that fear? Maybe if you have it. Go ahead.
So yes, we do get these questions like, will I get mad? Will I die? Will I get addicted? That's a very big one for a lot of people. Like, will it somehow be something that I want to take every week now?
Yes, this was, we'll get to the questions of the audience later on, but this was one of the questions, like, is there a risk of relapse in an addiction study, for instance? You take psychedelics and you get addicted to the experience maybe, but in any way?
Maybe to the experience, but the experience can be also very harsh. And if you ask people after retreat, would you want to do this again tomorrow? I think the vast majority will say no. But yes, I think it's very crucial in those preparatory phases that you talk about all of these things. Realistic expectations. Some people come in and say, like, this will change my life. No, not necessarily, or not immediately maybe. You still have to put in the work afterwards. So it's really talking about all of these misconceptions. Madness, the same thing. People are screened, of course, for, and I think in research settings as well, like, what's the familial background of certain psychotic disorders and bipolarity and et cetera, so, but you don't know what's going to happen. For some people, it's a very visual experience. For others, it's a more bodily experience. You don't know. So you have to be honest about it. And we're also a little bit. So a bad trip is not necessarily. How should I phrase? It's a challenging trip. So what we try to tell people is it's a quite safe, and I'm talking about psilocybin right now. It's a quite safe substance, but it can be a difficult experience, and that's okay if you're surrounded in by medical, with medical supervision and trained facilitators. It can actually be a good thing, and not necessarily a bad thing. And the research is also interesting because it says that typically people get more out of bad trips or challenging experiences than actually the very blissful, awe-inducing states. And I think, it's sometimes interesting because you have to overcome something. You have to manage and deal with something. And that's I think, the therapeutic value of it.
And I'm wondering how you deal with those fears in a clinical setting, maybe Marc or Felix?
Well, I have to say that in a clinical setting, I have not encountered any of these challenging situations. In a clinical context, I have never run into any sort of, okay, there might be some anxiety, some intense emotions, but not an emergency situation. My experience with difficult experiences is in recreational settings at Cosmic area, when I was talking about that psychological emergency service. I think that there's a difference between a difficult experience in which you can still be in contact with what's going on. You know that you're struggling with grief, with fear, with whatever, and experiences in which the intensity goes so high that you lose track of what's going on. And then it can become almost like a 6-hour panic attack, psychotic-like state. I don't think that that is useful. I think that somebody said it this morning, that 10 hours of this extreme suffering can become actually traumatizing. So in those instances, I think that it's safer to administer a benzodiazepine or something that will mellow the trip, because I have not seen a lot of good outcomes of when people are not there to register the experience, you know. But yeah, most of the times with a supportive environment and preserving physical safety, taking care of what interactions happen there, taking care of the space, reducing the stimuli. Sometimes you need to physically contain the person. Many times with that, you can just pass some hours and then person will go back to to a more normal state of consciousness. And then you can provide some context, what has happened, how come that they were here. In cosmic care, sometimes they are brought in this state, so they don't remember, they don't know where they are, and how come they ended up in a place with people that they don't know, that they are containing them, you know. So you need to provide certain context of what happened. Yeah. But in some situations, we have administered antipsychotic medication. So, yeah.
Well, we had some challenging moments, of course, but as of yet have not administered any medication. I think what is key, what you pointed to, is also the resolution of a difficult trip. And that reminds me of the video you showed of the mother and the baby. So when a patient spends 6 hours in torment and the therapists don't look after the patient and the patient doesn't feel cared for, they stay with this bad impression, so the ugly, what the doctor said in the video. But even if there's, let's say, 3-4 hours of a difficult, challenging trip, but at the end there's some kind of resolution, maybe some epiphany, some positive message, or just some serenity, because people just feel cared for and they feel that they can trust the therapist. I think that's really key, that this resolution.
Okay. Is there anything else that can go wrong during psychedelic-assisted therapy? And if so, how do you deal with it? Something else than just a challenging experience?
The therapist can go wrong. Yeah, sometimes.
In what way?
In many ways, no? Like you could either fall asleep and leave the person on their own, or you could start doing something that is invasive and not ethical, no? And many times we don't pay attention to the factor of the therapist, no? It's like personality of the client, the dose, the pathology, whatever. Yeah, but what are you doing, no? And I've actually worked in integration with people that have had a positive experience, but because of the interventions of the leader of the ceremony at the end, they felt that all of a sudden they needed support. It's like, well, I had an experience about this, and that, and I was doing okay. And then the leader said, no, but what happened really is that you this, and that, and you have an issue with your father, and you were not. No, and all of a sudden, we are very suggestible, we're very open in those states, and that can completely change the recollection of the experience. Yeah, so we do have a lot of potential impact on the journeys of people. We should be aware of that.
Mm-hmm. Marc van Steenkiste, what kind of patient would you not advise psychedelic-assisted therapy to?
And the people that I see, which are mostly not severely ill people from a psychiatric point of view, so I don't see people with really psychotic, like schizophrenia or severely bipolar. In literature, it is, of course, advised not to do that, so, but that's easy for me. I don't see them, so. What was interesting I don't know where you said it in your talk, Marc, but I think the growing towards the trip is, in my opinion, a very important thing. Yeah, every now and then I have a patient who came on the website and who made a rendezvous and could not go because the person they saw advised against it. And then when I believe this might be useful to do the trip, but maybe in a year, then the whole process of growing towards the trip, I've seen very beautiful things happening there. They remember one sentence the therapist on the website has said. Why did he say that? Why? And then we work with that. And I have several people who really have made a major leap forward during the process of growing towards the trip. And there comes a moment, that is a relational thing also, I think there comes a moment when I have confidence you are ready. And I think that is also a very important thing. More than one person has told me, if you believe in it, I dare to do it. Also hard to grasp in a scientific way, but I think if I would not be okay with it, I would never advise it. And maybe this says more about me than about the patient, but people you know for a longer time, you know all the nuances, and I have to be confident that they will be able to go through it. But nothing more I can say, that they can, even if it's terrible as an experience, okay, that's what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But are there certain people you would keep away from it?
Many.
Yeah. Who and why?
Who? First of all, people who see it as a kind of magic, almost like a medical intervention that happens to them. Like you take an antibiotic, you have a pneumonia, antibiotic, a week later you're okay. Something that has nothing to do with them as a subjective being. That I would never advise. And there are many like that, more and more, because of the media and so on. So people have sometimes the fantasy that you take a psychedelic, something switches, a reset, the great reset, and there we go. That was it. No. No, don't do it. Okay. Because I think people who stand in their life like this have almost no resilience for difficult situations, for difficult experiences. They put everything outside. Their own capacity, their own alpha function is very weak. So it's immediately blown away when something bad happens. So there I would say no. But I'm not talking about really severely ill from a psychiatric point of view people. There I have too little experience, but I don't think one would do that.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else on this question? I guess you have to screen out many people from the study?
Yes, of course. I mean, you have heard that we screen out people who have a history of bipolar disorder, psychotic disorders. But what I also learned from my limited experience, and maybe Marc could speak to that, is patients who have severe trauma, although if they don't have clinical PTSD, patients who have severe trauma and kind of don't want to look at it. I was like, yeah, I want to have a psychedelic experience, but I hope this doesn't come up. I think that's like a bad sign. Rather not do that. And also, I can relate to what you said. Yeah, people think it's a magic bullet, like thinking it will be somehow easy, or not imagining how hard it could be. I remember I was giving a presentation on a patient who had a challenging trip, and a psychiatrist in the audience, he was like, yeah, okay, that's a great story, but I don't get it. I mean, it's only 6 hours. It can't be that hard, right? And I said, well, okay. I didn't really know what to say, but ideally I would have liked to tell him, dude, just try it, and then we'll have the discussion later.
Anyone? No, okay. Well, another aspect of the work of PSBE, of course, is also to try to have a legal framework for psychedelic-assisted therapy. I'm curious about what you guys would advise to lawmakers when regulating psychedelic-assisted therapy. Also, is this a question at all for lawmakers or more for doctors and therapists? We approached the health cabinet in the latest legislature, and they told us, well, it's not for politics to tell what the best course of therapy is. While in the Netherlands, there's been an advisory committee to the government about MDMA therapy. So where do we stand, and what would you advise to lawmakers?
So I really think it's a complex, or it needs a complex collaboration amongst different stakeholders. I think we have different roles to play here. Lawmakers are definitely, and politicians are definitely necessary to sort of set certain ethical and legal boundaries. What substances can we use, for instance, in what ways, et cetera, et cetera. But then you have the clinicians, medical healthcare providers, people who are in the field and who are doing the work, basically, who need to come up with patient selection criteria and treatment protocols and training standards. And so it's a really end-to-end story rather than an or story, I believe. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is a good question, and I would say that if we wait for lawmakers to make the laws, those laws are going to reflect their view. You know, so if we wait for them to create the regulatory model, I don't know. I think it's much better to make the work for them. And in the end, politicians, they do want that. Truth is that this is already happening. We have underground therapists, we have people running retreats, we have clinicians working in clinical trials. So, and people in the underground have been working for a long, long time. I've seen some initiatives in different countries, the Netherlands, in Spain, and in other places, in which people that are working on the underground, but they have an aim to become above ground, they start getting organized in a way that politicians and lawmakers can understand. And most of the times, this has to do with administrative aspects. Like, okay, who are you? We are an association. An association of what? An association that is interested in the use of indigenous plants for healing or for growth. All right. And what do? We do this, this, and that. We administer ayahuasca that in Spain is not legal, not illegal. So we are in a gray area. What happens here? All right, but we do it like this, 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 and that. We do a screening. We have this medical form. We screen out certain people. We have a doctor that checks this and that. We follow up for a week or whatever. So you present what you're doing. That's going to be much easier for a lawmaker to say, someone did the work for me. I can go to my boss, my politician, say, hey, I have a plan for regulation of these plants. Yeah, and then they get the medal. Good for them. But the idea came from the grassroots movement. You know, and I think that this is much, much better in the long run because we are going to be able to have an influence on how these things should be done. For this, there's a need for brave people that are willing to go above ground and to explain what they are doing. Sometimes you can do that better in places which things are semi-legal, like in the Netherlands, for example, that you can run certain retreats. All right, it's not therapy, but you can still do a screening, you can do a follow-up, you can have a doctor in place, you know. So if we record all that, I think that that is the model for regulation. So it's not that we need to come up with a crazy idea. It's like what's already happening, make it safe, make it good, and make it replicable so other people will be able to kind of be inspired by the safe practices, you know.
Anyone else? No. So we both have clinicians and people doing scientific research, clinical research, and people working in real life situations. I was wondering about the divide between those two because clearly getting towards a legal framework comes with scientific research and clinical studies, but to what extent is it the same? Because in clinical research, you have a standard dosage for everyone, maybe adapted to the weight of the person, but basically it's the same for everyone. A standard number of sessions, a standard way of doing therapy, etc. Everything is standardized. You also take in like clean patients without or with the least possible number of comorbidities, things like that. So in what way does clinical research reflect the real world situations we would have after legislation? And is this a problem?
That's a big question. Well, of course, it's problematic. I mean, our patient samples in the studies never really represent the overall population, but that is the same for any randomized controlled trial done in medicine, I would say, especially in psychiatry. So, yeah, I have to say this as maybe like a preemptive strike, because that's always a problem in medicine. And if someone comes up with a better way of doing studies, I mean, go ahead, tell us, you'll get a Nobel Prize. I spoke about the problem with integration. So that's a huge problem we encountered is that there's not enough integration sessions for some people. And that's, yeah, so it's not, for some people, therapeutic enough. There's also the placebo condition, which can be very frustrating and disappointing for some participants, and also for the therapist, it's not always easy to handle. And yeah, there's a lot, but maybe the others can help.
Marc?
You have a very good point there. In the clinical trials, you were asking me before about challenging situations. Yeah, the challenging situations in clinical trials have come, in my experience, from placebo conditions. People that are expecting something to happen, and they go through the questionnaires, the interviews, they have to stop taking antidepressant medication, You know, like there's a whole process until you receive the dose, and then they receive placebo. You can imagine how terrible that can be, you know. So we've had to deal with people having suicidal ideation after the placebo, not the 25 milligram dose. Yeah. So that is something to consider, and that's why now the phase 3 with psilocybin includes an open label possibility for people at the end of the clinical trial, so they will receive a 25 milligram dose no matter what. Yeah. So that's something to take into account. But this is, as you're saying, this is only science, this is only research. It doesn't really matter what happens in that domain. When MDMA becomes a medicine, and it will become, and when psilocybin can be prescribed, and it will happen, the underground and the retreats and the shamanic and neo-shamanic, well, that will continue existing. The recreational use will continue to exist. So we're just addressing a specific part of the issue that needs to happen, but it's not the whole thing, you know. So it's good to start thinking about this, because we will solve one thing, but we will continue having, and some people will be even forced to the underground. If you legalize psilocybin or MDMA, and then let's say only psychiatrists can administer it, a lot of people with a lot of experience will be forced into the underground as well. So there can be some repercussions of certain harsh regulations, you know, and I guess that we will see this in the next few years.
You know?
I see there's also a trend of some researchers doing more naturalistic research, and in group settings, for instance.
Can you just define naturalistic
so
research?
they just they don't intervene as much, I would say. They just observe the people in the setting in which they take or have the psychedelic experience, in a way.
So not in a lab.
Not in a lab. It's in a group setting, typically. Could be in South America, could be in the Netherlands, whatever. Different cultures, right? But I think it's again a question of, we have different methods, and it adds something. We get different results, and okay, and what do we make out of it? So it's not, I think, an or kind of question. We do need both sides. Yeah. So I think we investigate different things with those different kind of or types of research. But I think it's a good thing that there is also the sort of counter movement going on, having more data on what is happening in other non-clinical ways.
Thank you. We received a lot of questions from the audience. Unfortunately, some of the questions were not readable because there must have been a bug with the computers. Some were one word or interrupted in between. So a few questions have unfortunately vanished. And we received many questions. We cannot take them all, but I've tried to group them in a few thematic questions. Many people were curious about training. How can I train? Where can I train? Or also, how, as a therapist, how do I know I'm ready to do psychedelic-assisted therapy or to give psychedelics to patients? I think, yeah, this training question is really a tough one, especially in Belgium, I guess. But anyone wants to comment? Marc?
I do participate as a teacher in different training programs, and I have to say that there is no program that will guarantee that you can administer psychedelics. At the moment, there is no such thing as a psychedelic therapist. We have therapists that work in clinical trials. You can be a psychedelic research therapist, but there's no qualification now that will guarantee that you can work with psychedelics. If you are lucky enough to live in Canada or in Switzerland, if you're a psychiatrist and you have the proper contacts and belong to the proper circles, you probably have a way to practice this way. But for the rest of us, the only way to become a psychedelic therapist at the moment is to be part of a research project. Yeah? And then you receive the training ad hoc. You go there, and sometimes it's therapists that they have no interest in psychedelic therapy at all. I've trained a good number, like a couple dozen therapists, that they just happen to be there, you know. My hospital is doing a research with psilocybin now. Never heard about psychedelics before, but I'm gonna be the therapist in the study. yeah, so that, no, that's quite impressive for those of us that have been decades in the field trying to find your way into it. No, and somebody that is not even looking for it, they find themselves in that position. So that is one of the challenges that we have currently. And we don't know yet. We don't know how the regulation is going to be. So I think it's good that there are training programs, but nobody can guarantee nowadays that if you take that training program, you're going to be able to work there. It's not even clear in Oregon, where they had a more open policy towards that. So, yeah, I think that a word of caution of going into trainings that would promise something that nobody can promise at the moment. What I would say is get a degree in psychology or in medicine, find a university or a hospital that's running these sort of programs, come to these meetings, get specific training in, I don't know, breathwork, integration, I don't know, whatever you want, but it's more of being around the people that are doing this already than a specific training that will open the doors. So I think that that's the hard truth about it, yeah?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Nina, to my knowledge, there's no center or school or whatever in Belgium that can offer psychedelic therapy training.
There will be something happening in the next years, very soon, close from Belgium, but that's all
making
I can
us
say.
curious.
That's all I can say at the moment.
Great, because we need it. I think we need it. Yeah.
Okay. So there's no clean fit solution right now. Also, what's the difference with or without a therapist taking psychedelics? If you want to do it with a therapist, how do you find one? Are they rare? Anyone want to comment on that question?
Yes, they are rare, I think, and some of them don't do it legally, so that's the problem, I guess, yeah.
What's the difference
with or without a therapist, do you mean? Is the question, is it advisable to do it without a therapist? Well, I don't think that's advisable, no, to do it without a therapist. So I think everybody that wants to do this should find someone.
Yeah, or you have it in a recreational setting, but that's a complete different story.
Yeah, it's not therapy.
Yeah, it's not therapy. If you want therapy, I would also recommend having someone that is a bit more knowledgeable about things that could come up or can help you through it. But let the person do it themselves, of course. But yeah, question is not specific enough, I think.
Okay. There were questions about indications as well. Have there been studies or experiences regarding autism spectrum disorder? I can answer part of that question. I know there's a whole movement called Autism on Psychedelics, run by Aaron Orsini. He was a guy with a severe autism spectrum disorder who found by himself a cure in Amsterdam. He went to Amsterdam to take psychedelics. I think it was with a therapist, but he got much better. Of course, he didn't get rid of his autism, but in daily life, he could function much, much better. And if you Google autism on psychedelics, he's written a book and he's launched a whole movement with conferences, etc. So for ASD, it's quite an interesting evolution. There was a question also, Marc, about dissociative identity disorder. Wondering if you shouldn't exert extra caution with these patients. Are they special regarding psychedelic therapy? Have you had any?
Me personally, I have, to be honest, never seen a person with a complete DIS. In the 90s, there were a lot of those patients, strangely enough, but it seems like they have disappeared.
It was some kind of fad.
I don't know. Maybe they were abducted. I don't know. But dissociation in rather extreme forms, like I have shown, that's rather frequent. Yes.
And does it pose a problem for psychedelic-assisted therapy?
I wouldn't say no, not necessarily. Case by case, you have to see if it's okay, but no. Of course, people who did dissociate a lot have, I think, a higher chance to meet with very unpleasant experiences. That it's not for nothing that you dissociate, but that's part of the process. I liked very much your slide about the psychotherapy that was above the psychedelic experience. I think that's the way I see it too. Yeah.
It should be fully embedded.
Well, from my experience, yes. Yeah.
Okay. Nina, you hinted at the presence of loved ones because you talked about the partner, the view of the partner about someone you treated. There was a question about that. Should loved ones be integrated within a psychotherapy framework with psychedelics? If so, at what stage and in what manner?
Very interesting question. Yes, I think if it's feasible, yes, I would integrate if the partner is open to it, and if there is a sort of conversation possible. Yes, I would recommend the partner in the therapy. But I'm also a couples therapist, so I'm used to working with systems. So it's a bit different for people who are more working with individual clients or patients. Yeah, I think it could definitely add an extra dimension of the integration because you sometimes don't see things yourself, and it's the other one that sees them first. So that's the biggest benefit, I would say.
So you'd say mainly in the integration phase, or?
No, even beforehand. I had people, and I do this already, sometimes people come in with the two of them because you hear more when you are with two people. And they each have their separate questions, basically. But they hear the other one asking and perhaps explaining the problem and what they want to get out of it, et cetera, et cetera. Sometimes also it gives them a sort of kind of relief. Okay, this is a person who who is going to do the psychedelic experience or facilitate it. But no, I would do it both in the preparation phase actually and then in the integration phase. Yeah.
And what about bringing in loved ones within the psychedelic session itself?
Also a possibility, but I think we need to sometimes. It really depends, I think, case by case, because sometimes there is a sort of grief process maybe about the partner, or it's a difficult experience, and you don't want the partner to be there. So you can talk about it, and you can have all sorts of measures in a way to have that partner maybe go outside for a while, or but yeah, I think this is a possibility. I think research-wise would be a very interesting question, actually.
To be considered, yes.
Yeah.
Would you like to say something, Marc?
Yeah, I think that this is an extremely interesting question that somehow it taps into how we construct our understanding of what pathology and what healing is. We have a very individual and intrapsychic understanding of pathology many times, but there are approaches that are more systemic, as we know. In Canada, there's a dear colleague, Anne Wagner, that she's done MDMA trials for people with a PTSD diagnosis, but she's done couples therapy. So both the couple receive the treatment to try to help the individual that has the diagnosis of PTSD. So you have two people doing the preparation session and integration, two people receiving the MDMA, but only one has an actual pathological diagnosis. No? So that's a very interesting approach of how working in a systemic or a couples environment, we can support a person. And I think that in the psychedelic, at least in our clinical trials, it is important that people have at least somebody, it can be a friend or family member, that can be not present during the sessions, but can be involved in the process. Yeah, this can be like a safety net in a way. Do you have somebody to speak to when you go back home after your experiences? Do you have somebody that knows what's going on during these months of the clinical trial? If they don't have any sort of social safety net, that could be a concern. Sometimes it could be a reason to rule out somebody from a clinical trial. Yeah, because if when you go home, you're going to be on your own, there's nobody there to support you. How can you hold? It's not that we leave you alone from the clinical trial, but then it's that you are alone. You know, there's no safety net, and that's extremely important. Yeah. So, yeah, I think that the social aspect makes all this more juicy, no? When we're having group experiences. And now I think that psychedelic research is going to go into group setting because, as I said before, right now it's too expensive. So we're going to have maybe one therapist with 2 participants. Maybe we're going to have one therapist, 4 different rooms, and a trained nurse that is cheaper than a psychiatrist. And the therapist is going to go every now and then to check, you know. So we will see the model changing. In a way, it's going to become more social. Yeah, it's going to be this idea of supporting each other rather than one therapist with one client. So it's going to be very interesting how the group and the social experience adds to the overall process of healing.
Thank you.
Yeah, speaking about loved ones, bringing in, I think here in the West we have a big problem with dying. Well, everybody has a problem with dying, but the process of dying, seeing dying as a process, there is a lot of research. Well, I read the research of long ago about the influence of psychedelics on the dying process. And I may be more personally involved because I had a friend a few years ago, and he lived in Barcelona. And he developed a very severe degenerative neurological disorder. He was going to die in several months. And he got anxiety attacks. He couldn't, well, at first he said, I don't understand it. It's not that I'm afraid of dying. But then I talked to him a bit, and I already had some inkling about it. He had had a traumatic experience when he was younger. And then I said to him, maybe a psychedelic trip is something for you. And I don't know where he went, but it was in Barcelona. And I will never forget, I had a Zoom call with him because he couldn't come to Belgium anymore and there wasn't enough time. And the way he appeared on that screen after the trip, it was really, I got tears in my eyes because he said, I'm ready. And the night before he got his euthanasia, I called him again, and in the screen, he was on the screen, and his living room was behind him, and I was talking to him. Tomorrow he would be dead. And he said, Marc, sorry, but I have a lot of visitors that are still coming, and okay. He said something like, see you, I don't know. But the miracle that I saw there of somebody not dying alone, connected with something, I think it's horrible when we see people dying here in our Western hospitals, in our care units. I think there should be more work and research on psychedelics for terminal people, and palliative care and so on. Do you know of any of those research objects? I don't know, programs? I don't know. Yes.
I know there's some people interested in launching a study on that, but as of yet, no.
But people die.
I didn't get the question.
I mean, like today, on a day like today, there was little about that. Maybe for
yes, that was last year, but there might be a project developing in like 2 or 3 years in Belgium, but still to be determined.
I wasn't here, right? Okay. But still, I think that would be also a very interesting field of research and clinical application.
Well, does any one of you wish to add a closing remark, something that wasn't touched upon, because we have to move on to the next coffee break, but if there's still something, a little thing to add? And if not, well, thanks a lot for participating in this clinicians panel.